Story 2. The Whispering Timber Bridge. I had been driving along a narrow dirt road deep in the Appalachian hills, the kind of road where the trees grow so close together that sunlight barely touches the ground, and the air smells of wet leaves and moss long after a rain. I'd heard about a forgotten wooden bridge tucked away in this part of the forest, a place where hikers rarely went and even locals avoided after dark. I wanted to take photos, something quiet and eerie for my own collection, nothing more than that. The bridge appeared after a bend in the road, sudden and almost hidden by overgrown brush and the shadow of tall pines leaning in like they were listening. It was old, more rusted nails and warped timber than anything structurally sound, and the boards groaned under my weight as I stepped onto it. I told myself it was normal, the sound of old wood protesting the intrusion of a stranger, but it made me uneasy nonetheless. The wind was alive that evening, but not just moving through the trees. There was something in it, some strange undercurrent that made me pause. As I moved further onto the bridge, I began hearing whispers, faint at first, as if the wind was carrying fragments of old conversations, broken and indistinct. They were hard to place, fleeting syllables that seemed to curl around my ears, tugging at my attention. I froze for a moment, leaning on the railing, trying to convince myself it was just the way the wind moved through the planks and railings. But then I realized the whispers weren't coming from above or below. They felt like they were coming from the bridge itself, from the air around me. And somewhere in that shifting, insistent sound, I thought I heard my own name. My skin prickled, and I stepped back instinctively. Leaning over the railing, I stared at the water beneath the bridge. The river was dark and sluggish, more black than anything else, and the fog hanging low over the surface made it impossible to see far. I tried to focus on the reflection of the trees in the water, something to ground myself, but the whispers grew louder, more coherent though still indistinct. They weren't malicious, at least not in a way I could name, but they were persistent, almost insistent, as if trying to pull me closer, to make me lean further, to see something I wasn't meant to see. I remember my heart racing, my breaths coming shallow and quick, the wooden boards creaking under me with each slight movement. Something about that place made me feel unbearably small. The air felt heavy, like it carried decades of human presence, all those who had walked across that bridge long before me. I imagined them there, hunters, wanderers, maybe even children, voices echoing faintly in the wind, whispers of lives that had passed unnoticed by the world. My curiosity battled with fear, and for a moment I considered stepping off the bridge entirely, leaving it behind as quickly as possible. But before I could, the wind shifted again, carrying my name in a soft, urgent drawl. I could swear it came from right beside me, yet when I turned, there was nothing. Panic made me move faster, my steps uneven on the warped planks. I ran back toward the road, the whispers still following, drifting just beyond reach, never fully leaving, never fully fading. When I reached my car, I locked the doors and pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, trying to steady my racing heart. Even then, I could feel the air clinging, the whispers faint but insistent, threading into the edges of my mind. I told myself it was fatigue, imagination, or the isolation of the road getting to me, but something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. Something in the bridge wanted to be remembered, wanted to be noticed, and it had taken notice of me. I left the area quickly that night, taking a longer route back to town, glancing over my shoulder at the bridge several times. Even in the distance, it seemed alive in a way I couldn't define, its outline pressing against the fog like a sentinel. I tried to push the memory from my mind, but sleep was uneasy, filled with fragments of whispers, planks creaking under phantom weight, and the sensation of eyes on me that weren't there when I opened them. Days passed, yet the sound remained in my ears, quiet and persistent, like a tide I couldn't stop. I found myself returning to that bridge, but only in dreams. Night after night, it appeared in the same place, overgrown and weathered, each board more fragile than the last. The whispers were clearer there, voices I almost recognized as human, but distorted by time and memory. They called me to the edge of the railing, urging me to lean over to see what they saw. I never did. Waking was a relief, though it never lasted long. The sound would linger in the corners of my mind during the day, in the rustle of leaves outside my window, in the movement of branches along the roadside. It became a subtle fear, one that existed quietly behind every sound and shadow, a constant hum just out of focus. I asked around the town, mentioning the bridge casually to locals. Most shrugged or shook their heads, some chuckled nervously, but a few gave me a look I'll never forget, a mixture of pity and warning. They said it had been there a long time, and some people believed it carried voices from the past. Children who had wandered too close would sometimes come home rattled, talking about whispers or shadows. Others, the older folks said quietly, had vanished entirely. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. I had felt it myself. The quiet weight of attention, the way the bridge seemed aware of every footstep, every heartbeat, every breath of wind. Returning home, I tried to ignore it, but the sound settled into my mind like a memory that refuses to fade. I couldn't sleep without imagining the boards creaking, my name carried on the wind. Sometimes I would dream I was standing there again, leaning over the railing, the water beneath impossibly dark and endless. The whispers would surround me, voices of lives long past, urging me to step closer, to listen more closely, to see the bridge as it truly was. The fear was tangible in those dreams, the same raw, grounding fear I had felt the first night. A reminder that some places hold memory, and some places hold more than just memory. They hold insistence. Over the years, I've driven past that road several times, trying to avoid it, trying to convince myself it wasn't there, but it always appears around the next bend. The forest seems denser, the air thicker, and sometimes, if I glance at it from my rearview mirror, the bridge seems to shift slightly, as if adjusting to my presence. The whispers don't always come, but the feeling is always there. That patient, watchful quality, the sense that something remembers me and that it is waiting. I don't stop anymore. I keep driving, heart tight, hands gripping the wheel, but the memory is lodged in me. A quiet, unyielding presence that reminds me of that night, and every night in dreams since. Even now, years later, the bridge calls, not with threats, not with rage, but with a quiet insistence I cannot deny. It whispers in the wind that slips under my window at night. It lingers in the shadows of overgrown roads. It exists in the small sounds I can't place, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of branches, the faint echo of my own name carried on a distant, restless wind. I cannot go back, yet I know that part of me never really left. The bridge has marked me, its whispers embedded in memory, patient and enduring, a quiet reminder that some places remember every step taken upon them, and some voices never leave, no matter how far you drive from the hills that hold them. Story 3. Midnight Crossing at Fog Hollow. I remember that night in Fog Hollow like it happened yesterday, even though years have passed. The fog was heavy, almost unreal, rolling over the hills in thick blankets that swallowed the outlines of trees and cliffs, leaving only the dim glow of my headlights to mark the road. I had been driving home from a friend's cabin, a detour through a back road I hadn't taken before, thinking it would save time. Instead, it became one of the most unnerving drives of my life. The hollow was quiet, so quiet that the hum of my engine seemed unnaturally loud. Every few yards the tires crunched over gravel or slipped on damp patches, and the only other sound was the soft whisper of fog brushing against branches. The deeper I drove into the hollow, the heavier the fog became, until my headlights barely penetrated more than a few feet. That's when I saw it. The bridge appeared suddenly, old and skeletal, spanning the creek that cut through the hollow. I could barely make out the rusted guardrails and the warped wooden planks beneath the dim light. Then a figure stepped onto the bridge. At first, I thought it was a man, but the way he, or whatever it was, moved made my stomach twist. There was something wrong about it, not human exactly. The movements were uneven, jerking in ways that no person's body should move. I froze, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached, unsure if I was witnessing a hallucination brought on by fatigue, or if something truly existed there, waiting. My curiosity fought with every instinct screaming at me to leave, and I slowed, squinting through the fog. The figure vanished the instant I honked my horn. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. My heart thudded, every muscle taut, as if my body was expecting it to reappear at any moment. I waited in the car, headlights barely reaching the bridge, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was a deer, or a local drunk walking the road, or my mind playing tricks with shadows and fog. But the bridge felt alive, aware of my presence in a way I couldn't explain. The rusted guardrails and the warped planks seemed to hold memories of long past events, and the fog carried an almost tangible weight, thick with unspoken history. The hollow itself felt alive, breathing and watching. I tried to convince myself to keep driving, to ignore what I'd seen, but I couldn't. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, listening to the creek below, which murmured like it held secrets I wasn't meant to know. Each time the wind moved through the trees, I thought I heard whispers, faint and distant, as if the hollow itself was murmuring. I considered calling out, asking if someone was there, but fear rooted me in place. The figure hadn't reappeared, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to, after what felt like hours. Though it was probably only minutes, I drove on, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, though I knew the hollow had already imprinted itself on my memory. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that what I had seen was nothing more than fog and imagination. I thought about it all day, uneasy, feeling that cold weight in my chest that I hadn't felt before. I told a friend about it, someone who knew the back roads well. He nodded slowly and warned me, quietly, about the bridge at Fog Hollow. He said locals avoided it at night, that the bridge had a reputation for being a place where people disappeared, or claimed to see strange figures moving in ways that made no sense. He shrugged, telling me it was probably just old stories to scare travelers. But I had felt the hollow, and it wasn't stories I felt. It was memory, weight, and the sense of eyes on me in the fog. Weeks later, I returned to that road in daylight, hoping to see the bridge clearly, to understand what I had witnessed. In the light of day, it was nothing extraordinary. An old wooden bridge, rotting boards, rusted guardrails, and the creek slipping quietly beneath. No figure, no movement, nothing to suggest the fear I had felt the night before, but the memory clung to me, stubborn and heavy. Even in daylight, I could feel the sense of the hollow, watching, waiting, patient. I walked across the bridge, each plank groaning underfoot. And though nothing happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking on more than just wood and nails. Something had happened there before me, and the bridge remembered it. Years have passed since that night, but Fog Hollow has never left me. I dream of the bridge sometimes, the fog rolling in impossibly thick, the figure stepping onto the planks with that strange, jerking movement. I hear my own voice calling from beneath the fog, and I wake with my heart hammering, unable to shake the memory. Driving past the hollow now, even in daylight, I feel it again. The heavy air, the almost imperceptible shift in the wind, the sense that someone, or something is aware of me. The bridge is patient, and the hollow is patient. And it waits for the next person to slow down, to peer into the fog, to look too closely. I have never told anyone the full truth of what I saw that night, not because I think they wouldn't believe me, but because some experiences refuse to be shared. The memory is mine, embedded deep in my bones. And though I avoid that road when I can, sometimes circumstances put me near the hollow again. Each time I grip the wheel tightly, glance at the skeletal outline of the bridge, and feel the cold tug of memory. The figure, whatever it was, remains unexplainable, and the hollow itself seems to remember, waiting for someone else to witness what I did. I've often thought about going back, really going back, to cross the bridge at night, to see if I could witness it again and maybe understand. But something inside me knows that curiosity would be dangerous. The hollow isn't kind to those who linger. It isn't a place that forgives mistakes or indulgent curiosity. It keeps what it has, and it reminds you quietly, insistently, that some places are older and more alive than you can imagine. That night, I didn't just see a figure. I saw the weight of memory, the insistence of something unseen, and the patient, almost sentient quality of the hollow itself. Even now, when I think of Fog Hollow, I hear it. The creak of planks, the rush of water, the subtle whisper of wind through the trees. It's not threatening, not exactly, but it's insistent. It reminds me that I was there, that I saw it, and that the hollow, with its fog and its bridge, waits for others, patient and unwavering. I don't drive that road at night anymore, but I will always hear the hollow, and I will always feel the weight of that bridge beneath the fog, a presence I cannot fully understand, and likely never will. Story 4. The Bridge That Vanished at Dawn. I remember that morning with a clarity that's almost painful, even now. I had taken a detour on my way home from a late-night shift, a road I'd driven countless times before, a shortcut I knew like the back of my hand. The road was narrow, winding between hills that rose like dark sentinels on either side, lined with thick trees that had clawed at the edges of the asphalt for decades. I drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the residual mist of the early morning, and I thought about nothing in particular, just the quiet hum of the engine, the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind, and the way the mist clung to the edges of the road like a whisper. I approached the spot where the bridge always was. It was small, nothing remarkable. A steel structure spanning a shallow creek, planks rotting in parts, guardrails rusted but solid enough for decades of traffic. But as I rounded the bend that morning, my chest hitched and my stomach sank. There was no bridge, just a hollow trench in the ground where the creek gurgled silently below, and the road seemed to fall away into nothing. My mind recoiled, thinking I had imagined it, perhaps taking a wrong turn somewhere, but no, the road was exactly where it should be, the creek beneath exactly where it should be, yet the bridge that had always spanned it was gone. I parked the car on the side of the road, my pulse hammering in my ears. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and approached the empty span. The earth seemed almost aware of my intrusion, the hollow stretching farther than it ought, the edges of the creek embankments too precise, too intentional, as though something had carved them out to make me stop and stare. I leaned over, peering into the water, expecting perhaps to see some trick of light or reflection, some remnant of the bridge, but there was nothing. Just the faint, steady current and the mist rising from it, curling and twisting in the morning light. I drove back into the nearest town, hoping someone could explain it, hoping that this was some temporary construction or a work crew doing early maintenance. I asked locals at a small diner, mentioning the bridge casually, expecting a shrug or a laugh. But their reactions chilled me. A few looked at me blankly, as if they hadn't the faintest idea what I was talking about. One older man leaned in across the counter, his eyes narrow, voice low. "There ain't never been no bridge there," he said quietly. I pressed him, trying to explain that I had walked, driven, and counted the boards countless times in my life. That I remembered the creak of the planks underfoot, the rusted railings I always avoided. He shook his head, offering no further explanation, and the diner fell silent, as if the subject itself carried weight that shouldn't be disturbed. I returned to the site later that day, midday sun softening the edges of the hills. Fog long gone. The trench remained, empty and perfectly hollow. I ran my hands along the eroded edges, the air vibrating in a way I couldn't describe, a low hum that pressed against my chest, something unseen and patient. I took photographs, hoping to capture evidence, but when I looked at them later, the images were nothing but an empty gap in the road and a quietly flowing creek, completely ordinary and unremarkable. Yet the weight of that empty space remained, a presence I could feel pressing into me. Over the next few weeks I returned at different times, dawn, midday, dusk, but the bridge never returned. I began to notice small things, subtle changes in the area around it. The grass at the edges of the hollow seemed to lean inward, the trees surrounding it forming unnatural shadows that twisted toward the trench. Birds avoided the area, even the wind seemed hesitant, rustling in unnatural patterns. I began to dread driving past that road, and yet something drew me back, the way you are drawn to a wound you cannot see. I asked more people, neighbors, old-timers who had lived in the region their entire lives. Some spoke vaguely of construction decades ago. Others dismissed me, insisting I must be mistaken. A few whispered about odd happenings, people disappearing near that stretch of creek, but they all stopped short of any clear story. And yet, the memory of the bridge, its solidity, its creaking boards, the way it had always been there, persisted, stubbornly alive in my mind. The hollow where it had stood seemed to vibrate with some old energy, as though the earth itself remembered what had been removed and wanted me to remember too. At night, I dream of it often. I see the road perfectly intact and the bridge spanning the creek just as it always had been. I walk across it feeling the familiar groan of rotting boards beneath my boots and hear the wind whispering through the rusted rails. And then, in a blink, it vanishes, leaving only the hollow trench and the cold, humming air. I wake with my heart pounding, convinced that if I close my eyes again it will appear before me, waiting silently, patient and unyielding. Even now, years later, I drive past that stretch of road whenever I can, though I avoid the early morning hours. I still feel the weight of the empty space in the air, an almost tangible pressure, a quiet insistence that I remember. I've asked others, tried to coax stories from locals, but no one can confirm the bridge ever existed. And yet I know it did, and I know I have not imagined the hollow feeling, the vibration of unseen weight pressing down, the sense that some small, precise gap in the earth is alive with memory, patient and unwilling to release it. It haunts me, the absence of the bridge, more than its presence ever did. There's a strange sort of sorrow to it, a quiet horror in the knowledge that something can simply disappear and the world may forget it entirely, yet its memory lingers in ways you can feel but cannot explain. I sometimes imagine standing there at dawn, alone, peering into the hollow, feeling the vibration, and waiting to see if the bridge might return, not fully, but as a shadow, a whisper, a reminder of what once was. But it never does. The earth keeps its silence. And I drive past, carrying the weight of something I cannot name, something patient and enduring, a reminder that the hills hold more than just roads and creeks. They hold memory, insistence, and absence, and they will remind you if you wander too close. Story 5. Echoes on the Rusted Suspension. I arrived at the abandoned suspension bridge late in the afternoon, hoping to set up camp and capture some photos at sunrise. The road leading to it was little more than a gravel track, winding through the hills and thick forests of the Appalachians. By the time I parked and shouldered my camera bag, the shadows had already begun to deepen between the trees, and the bridge itself loomed ahead like a skeletal relic, suspended over a creek that gurgled quietly below. I remember the metal cables stretching taut across the span, rusted but strong, the way the wind tugged at them with a low, whining groan that sounded almost like sighs. I set up my tent a short distance away, just off the gravel, keeping the bridge in my line of sight. As twilight fell, the forest quieted. There was no sound except for the creek below and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I wandered onto the bridge, camera in hand, testing the angles of light and shadow. The boards creaked beneath my boots, each step announcing itself in the empty hollow of the valley. That's when I first heard it, the faint echo of footsteps, distinct, deliberate pacing along the bridge. I froze, heart hammering, looking around. The bridge was empty. I could see no one in the distance, nothing moving, but the echo persisted. It circled me, impossible to locate, bouncing from one side to the other, up and down the planks, and my skin prickled. I told myself it was the boards settling, or my own imagination, or the way sound travels strangely over metal cables and water, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I stepped back and listened, holding my breath. The echo moved again, circling me in a pattern that made no sense, as if the bridge itself were walking. I took a tentative step forward, and the sound followed in exact rhythm, just slightly behind my own footfalls. My rational mind struggled to find an explanation, but the weight in my chest grew heavier. The wind moaned through the cables, mingling with the echoes, creating a soundscape that pressed in on me, intimate and oppressive. I left the bridge and returned to my tent, though sleep was impossible. Every creak of the boards, every whisper of wind, felt amplified, as if whatever had been pacing along the bridge had followed me into the shadows of my own camp. Night passed slowly. I lay awake, hearing the creak below, the wind tugging at the metal cables, and the occasional faint echo that seemed to drift just beyond the edge of hearing. I didn't dare move, too fearful to even peek toward the bridge. At one point, I thought I saw shadows flit along the railings, impossible to confirm in the darkness, and I convinced myself to keep my eyes shut and pretend the night was ordinary. But I never truly relaxed. Dawn was a relief I had not anticipated. When first light crept over the hills, I forced myself out of the tent and onto the bridge. Everything looked normal at first glance, just rusted cables, weathered boards, and the shallow creek below. I scanned the span carefully, and that's when I noticed the scratches, fresh gouges in the wood, deep enough to catch the light, as if someone, or something, had been pacing along them during the night. The footprints I had imagined were gone, leaving no impression in the dirt or gravel, but the scratches remained, deliberate and unmissable. My hands trembled as I traced one with a fingertip. It was impossible to place their origin or purpose, yet the boards seemed to hum with the memory of movement. I felt watched, though there was no one there. I took my camera and photographed the scratches, trying to make sense of it. Even in daylight, the bridge felt alive, as though the metal cables and wooden boards remembered every step taken upon them. I moved slowly along the span, listening. The wind was gentle now, almost polite, yet the faint echo of footsteps seemed embedded in the air itself, circling, pacing, patient. I stepped back off the bridge, lowering my camera, aware that whatever had waited for me the night before was no longer visible, but still present in memory and sound. I camped there no longer. Driving back through the hills, I glanced once more at the bridge. The morning mist clung to the cables, thin and ethereal, giving the span an otherworldly quality, though there was nothing fantastical about it. The scratches were gone from sight in the distance, or perhaps hidden in shadows, but I knew what had been left behind. I felt it as a weight, patient, silent, like the bridge itself had kept vigil and remembered my presence. Later, I asked around the nearest town, mentioning the bridge. A few locals frowned, shaking their heads vaguely, speaking in half-remembered warnings about that stretch of creek. They didn't give details, but there was a consistent undertone of caution, an unspoken respect for the old structure and its uncanny presence. One man muttered about hikers who had vanished, though he quickly changed the subject. I left the conversation unsettled, more certain than ever that the bridge held something more than mere metal and wood. It held memory, insistence, and patience, as if it had waited for me for reasons I could not understand. Over the next few weeks, I returned, during daylight only, always cautious. The scratches were gone each time, the boards quiet beneath my boots, yet the sense of movement lingered, subtle, barely perceptible, like an echo clinging to the edges of hearing. Every creak of the planks, every groan of the cables in the wind seemed exaggerated, deliberate, as if the bridge were aware of me again, reminding me that it had not forgotten. I would linger a moment, feeling the empty air press against my chest, trying to convince myself it was all memory, imagination, and yet I could not escape the certainty that something had waited for me, patient and silent, hidden in the soundscape of wind and wood. I do not return at night anymore. Even thinking about it summons the low hum of cables and faint echoes of pacing that I cannot locate. Driving past the bridge, even in sunlight, I feel the subtle pull of that space, the quiet insistence of its memory, as if it were aware of every footstep taken, every breath drawn nearby. I have not told many people the full story, because some experiences carry weight that ordinary words cannot contain. Yet I know the truth of it, that I was watched, that something waited, silent and patient, and that the bridge itself remembered my presence more fully than I could. Even years later, I dream of the suspension bridge. In the dreams, the boards groan under my weight, the cables hum, and faint footsteps circle me, never revealing their source. The scratches appear on the wood once more, fresh and deep, as though marking my passage again. I wake with my heart hammering, cold and unsteady, and the memory of waiting, silent, patient, insistence, clings to me throughout the day. I drive past the bridge whenever I can, keeping my eyes on the road, but the hum and the echoes linger, threading through the air, reminding me that the rusted span has not forgotten, and that it still waits. I have never returned to camp there. The memory is enough. The bridge's presence, though invisible, is tangible in a way that can never be ignored. Its rusted cables, weathered boards, and lingering echoes are patient, watching, keeping a memory that no daylight or distance can erase. And even as I tell this now, years later, I can hear it in the back of my mind, the pacing, the subtle scratching, the hum of metal and wood, and I know the bridge will wait for the next visitor, patient and silent, as it waited for me. Story 6. Lanterns flickering over Blackwater. I remember that night along Blackwater Creek more vividly than I care to admit. I had been following an old, barely maintained road that twisted through the Appalachian hills, the kind of road where trees crowd in on both sides, blotting out the moonlight and leaving you alone with your headlights. It was late, later than I usually drove, But I had wanted to take a shortcut back home, one that hugged the creek for a few miles before rejoining the main road. The gravel crunched under my tires, the engine sounding louder than usual in the stillness, and every now and then I thought I heard the faint rustle of leaves like whispers in the darkness. Eventually, the road brought me to the wooden bridge spanning Blackwater Creek. It wasn't much. Old planks, worn railings, the kind of structure that seemed barely sturdy enough to support a single car. The creek below roared faintly as it twisted through the valley, dark and restless. I slowed my car and leaned over the railing, taking in the shape of the water in the dim light. That's when I saw them, small lights, bobbing along the bridge, flickering like lanterns carried by invisible hands. My heart jumped, not in fear yet, but in that strange mix of curiosity and unease that comes from seeing something you cannot explain. The lights moved slowly, almost teasingly, dipping low and bobbing high, then disappearing entirely when I tried to approach on foot. I stepped onto the bridge cautiously, the boards groaning under my weight. Each footfall echoed unnaturally in the quiet night, and the wind picked up, tugging at my jacket and carrying the faint scent of wet wood and earth. I searched for the source of the lights, scanning the planks and the shadowed edges of the creek, but there was nothing. It was as though the lanterns had never existed, only lingering in the corner of my vision, teasing me. The rushing water beneath me felt alive somehow, almost sentient, and I could swear I heard whispers carried on the wind, faint murmurs that blended with the creek's roar. I leaned further over the railing, peering into the creek. And that's when the water changed. It went blacker than the night sky itself, opaque and motionless despite the sound of rushing currents. And then, just for a heartbeat, I thought I saw them. Faces, pale and motionless, staring straight up at me from beneath the surface. They weren't floating like debris, they were watching, patient and silent, their eyes empty and accusing. My stomach turned and I stumbled back, hand gripping the railing so tightly I could feel the rough wood pressing into my palm. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the lanterns I had imagined, but the certainty in those faces made disbelief impossible. The lights flickered again, briefly, and vanished, leaving only the sound of the water and the rustle of leaves in the trees. I didn't stay to see more. My steps were hurried and uneven as I retreated from the bridge, boots slipping slightly on wet planks, heart hammering in my chest. Once I reached the road again, I didn't look back. I drove away as fast as the winding gravel would allow, eyes glued to the darkened trees on either side, certain that something had been watching me the whole time. Even now, years later, I cannot pass a stream or a bridge in the mountains without feeling the memory settle over me. The image of those faces beneath the water, pale and unwavering, returns unbidden. Every flicker of light in the shadows feels like a warning. Every ripple in the water a potential revelation. I've asked locals about the bridge, about Blackwater Creek, and some speak of strange occurrences, of lights on the water that appear without source, of people walking near the creek at night who never return. Others dismiss me, insisting I must have been tired, imagining things in the dark, but I know what I saw. I have returned during the day to try and rationalize it. The bridge is old and the creek dark, yes, but nothing resembling those faces appears in the sunlight. The boards are solid enough, the water clear and shallow in places, the rusted rails offering no hint of the otherworldly presence I encountered at night. Yet the memory persists with a weight of reality that cannot be shaken. I remember the way the air seemed to hum around the lanterns, the water below heavier than it had any right to be, the silent patience of something waiting beneath the surface, watching, unseen. Sleep does not always come easily. I dream of Blackwater Creek often, of standing on that bridge with the lanterns flickering before me, tiny lights moving impossibly through the darkness. I hear the water shift beneath me, the faint murmurs of voices rising from the depths, and the pale faces staring without expression. I wake with my body tense, heart racing, and the memory pressing into me with the weight of inevitability. The details never fade, the smell of wet wood, the feel of the wind against my skin, the distant echo of those imagined footsteps pacing along the bridge. I avoid that road now, but the memory has infected my perception. Every creek I cross in the hills seems deeper, darker, more vigilant than it should be. Every bridge I approach in the Appalachian backcountry carries the weight of possibility, the awareness that something could be waiting silently beneath, watching with patience and intent. I tell myself I am careful, rational, observant, but the lingering images of Blackwater Creek and those flickering lights remain as vivid as the night I first saw them, an experience that refuses to fade. Even recounting the story brings a tremor to my chest. The memory is too precise, too tactile. I can still feel the mist in my hair, the vibration of the boards beneath my feet, the invisible presence circling me in the darkness. The lanterns flickered, but they were not the lights themselves that haunt me. They were the markers, the indicators that something in the hollows watches and remembers. I cannot say what it was, nor can I explain why it waited for me there, but I know it did, patient, silent, and unseen. The hills and hollows of Appalachia hold more than trees and gravel roads. They hold memory, patient and unyielding, and I carry it with me. That night by Blackwater Creek taught me a truth I cannot unlearn. The wilderness remembers, the shadows carry witness. And what appears ordinary by daylight can hold a vigilance that will follow you for the rest of your life. Lanterns may flicker, water may ripple, and the bridge may seem empty, but in the depths, the unseen waits, patient and watching, and it will not forget. Story 7. The Vanishing Hitchhiker at Hollow Creek. I remember that night with a clarity I can't shake, even years later. I had been driving home from a late shift, the kind of night where the sky was so overcast it seemed to swallow all light, and the hills of Appalachia pressed in from every side. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating only the edges of the gravel road ahead. Hollow Creek Road had always been quiet, even during the day, but at night it felt endless, isolated, and utterly empty. I had just rounded a bend when I saw her, a young woman standing on the side of a rickety wooden bridge that spanned the creek. The bridge itself was old, the boards warped and uneven, rusted nails glinting faintly in the dim light. At first, I thought she might need help, or maybe she had broken down like so many drivers do out here. I slowed, and she didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there, her figure almost motionless in the shadows. She was pale, her hair dark, and the way she stood made her seem separate, almost out of place, like she belonged to the bridge more than the road. Against every instinct urging me to keep moving, I stopped. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, though my voice felt too loud in the heavy night air. She didn't respond. She just opened the car door and climbed in silently. I remember the way the leather of the seat pressed beneath her hands, the faint scent she carried, something like cold mist, and something older, something I couldn't name. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She just stared forward, expressionless. I swallowed hard, telling myself she was shy or frightened, and I started the car again, moving slowly off the bridge. The road wound on for several miles, twisting between hills and thick stands of trees. My headlights bounced across the branches, throwing skeletal shadows onto the gravel. I stole a glance at her in the passenger seat and noticed something that made my stomach knot. She didn't blink, not once, and she didn't breathe audibly. Her hands rested limply on her lap, and though I knew she had gotten in willingly, her presence felt cold, almost hollow. I told myself it was nerves, exhaustion from the long shift, maybe even my imagination. After a few minutes, curiosity, or maybe fear, overcame my hesitation. I turned slightly to speak to her, and that's when my heart stopped. She wasn't there. The seat beside me was empty, as if she had never existed. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, and I slammed the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the loose gravel. I looked around frantically, trying to see if she had somehow climbed out, maybe into the woods, but there was no trace. Not a movement, not a shadow, nothing but the empty road ahead and the still, silent trees on either side. I turned the car around, moving back toward the bridge, heart hammering, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe she had slipped out when I wasn't paying attention. Maybe I had hallucinated the whole encounter. But when I arrived at the bridge, it was empty. No sign of anyone standing there. The boards groaned softly under the tires, the creek beneath flowing as quietly as ever, dark and indifferent. I parked and walked carefully along the bridge, scanning the edges, the shallow banks, even the surrounding woods. Nothing. My pulse thundering, I felt the cold weight of absence press down, a presence that was there and not there all at once. I asked around the next day in the nearest town, bringing up the bridge casually, almost too casually, hoping someone might confirm that a woman had been there. The locals exchanged glances, hesitant, as if I had unearthed some memory they didn't want to speak aloud. Eventually, one old man, hunched and wrinkled with age, spoke quietly. "That bridge, that's Hollow Creek. Years back, a girl died there, hit her head on the boards, fell into the water. They say she appears at night, always to drivers going home late, never speaks, never stays." His voice trailed off, eyes narrowing, and I felt the weight of the place settle over me in a way I hadn't felt before. Even months later, I can't forget the cold presence she carried in the car, the way her silence filled the space like a frozen fog. Every time I drive past that bridge, even in daylight, I think about her standing there, waiting. The memory is tactile, the slight chill on my skin when she was beside me, the way the air seemed to contract around the seat, the oppressive hush of the night. I know it was not a dream, not fully, because memory is too vivid, too real. The bridge swallows people, stories, and perhaps even time itself. I've tried to tell myself it was an illusion, an overworked mind seeing what it wanted or feared to see. But something in the way the boards groan, the way the creek flows beneath, the way shadows bend across the road tells me it was real. The encounter left an impression that cannot be erased, a lingering sense that some places in these hills are patient, waiting for the unwary, watching them cross thresholds that are not fully theirs to traverse. And even now, driving home on other late nights, I cannot escape it. Every bridge I pass feels like Hollow Creek. Every dark stretch of road feels alive with the memory of what could appear, and the thought presses on my chest like the weight of water. I know I'll never forget the young woman who climbed silently into my car, who vanished without sound or trace, leaving only the echo of cold presence and the knowledge that the hills are never truly empty. Story 8. Fog-haunted Truss Bridge. I remember that night as if it were pressed into my memory with the weight of the fog itself. I was driving home along a stretch of back road in the Appalachians, the kind of road where even headlights feel inadequate, cutting only a few feet ahead before darkness swallows the rest. The hills were smothered in fog, thick and damp, clinging to every tree and rock. My tires crunched against the gravel as I approached the old truss bridge spanning a narrow creek below. Its steel framework loomed out of the mist, skeletal and unfamiliar, though I had crossed this bridge countless times before. The fog distorted it, softened it, and made it seem both immense and impossibly fragile at the same time. I slowed my car as I rolled onto the bridge. The boards groaned beneath the weight of the tires, and the sound echoed back to me in the emptiness, as though the bridge itself were speaking softly, warning me. I squinted into the fog, trying to pierce the white haze, and that's when I saw it. A shadow shifting along the railing, a movement deliberate and human, but with no wind to stir the mist. My stomach tightened. I instinctively reached to lock the doors, telling myself it was a trick of the fog, a branch, or my own exhaustion making shapes out of nothing. Yet every instinct in my body screamed that it was something else, something deliberate. I eased the car forward, slowly, heart hammering in my chest, eyes fixed on the shadow. Midway across the bridge, the fog thickened even further, and the structure seemed to stretch longer than I remembered. The end disappeared into the white void, impossible to place, like the bridge had become a corridor to another place entirely. My headlights barely illuminated the steel trusses, leaving the space between them a mass of impenetrable grey. Shapes began to move just beyond the edges of the light, figures too dark and amorphous to make out clearly. They shifted and slipped in the corners of my vision, and my hands tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles white. The sound of my own breathing seemed deafening, mingling with the faint creak of metal and the subtle rush of the creek below. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that I had spent too long alone on these roads at night, letting imagination twist the fog into figures, but there was a rhythm to the shapes, a deliberate pacing that made my skin crawl. They did not scatter when I honked the horn or shifted the headlights. They simply remained, just beyond the light, patient and impossible to confront. Panic rose slowly, the kind that builds like a tide pressing at the edges of your mind. I pressed the accelerator gently, unwilling to leave the bridge, yet desperate to reach the end. The fog swallowed the distance, and the bridge seemed to stretch impossibly farther than it should, the opposite side remaining hidden, teasing, unreal. Shadows slipped between the steel beams in a slow, deliberate procession, their outlines indistinct, yet somehow familiar, like faces I should recognize but cannot. I could not bring myself to look directly at them for long, afraid that acknowledgement would trap me in this suspended place. The air round the car grew damp, heavy with mist that seeped through the cracks of the windows and made my skin prickle. The bridge beneath me seemed alive in its own way, creaking and groaning with each tire rotation as though aware of my presence, aware of the intruder passing through its domain. I wanted to drive faster, to leave, but every muscle was tight with unease, and the fog ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, holding me suspended in a place that was neither here nor there. I forced my gaze forward, trying to focus on the faint outline of the far railing. I could not see the end of the bridge, only the rhythmic sway of shadows just out of reach, sliding along the edges of the headlights. The shapes were fleeting, but their presence was undeniable, pressing against the edges of perception like a memory I could not place. My pulse thundered, a constant drum in my ears, and I fought the rising terror threatening to freeze me in place. Somewhere midway, a sound reached me, footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing along the boards, but no figure appeared in the headlights. I could hear nothing else moving, no wind, no animals, only the low, deliberate pacing and the faint hum of metal stretching beneath me. My stomach turned, and the car seemed heavier, as though the bridge itself resisted my crossing. I did not stop, but my eyes darted constantly, trying to glimpse something tangible, something real, to anchor me in the ordinary. Nothing came. When I finally reached the point where I expected the bridge to end, the fog thickened as if it had been waiting. The far side was gone, obscured completely, a void that absorbed all light. I pressed the accelerator harder, ignoring the protest of the tires and the protest of my own nerves, and the car surged forward into nothingness. Only when the headlights broke through the thinner mist beyond the bridge did I realize I had left the oppressive corridor behind. I glanced back once, heart still hammering, and the bridge was gone. The fog hung heavy in the hollow, but the structure itself seemed to have vanished, leaving nothing but white emptiness and the sound of the creek flowing beneath. Even now I cannot drive past that hollow without the memory pressing in. The fog seems thicker there than anywhere else, the shadows deeper, the air heavy with something I cannot name. I have returned during daylight, attempting to see the bridge as it should be, to find a tangible explanation, but all I see are the familiar hills, the winding road, and a quiet hollow where the road curves over Blackwater Creek. There is no evidence of a truss bridge, no faint impressions of boards or railings, only the lingering sense that I pass through something that exists outside of ordinary time, a threshold I was fortunate to cross and fortunate to leave. The images haunt me, shadows moving just beyond vision, figures with faces I could not identify, the bridge stretching impossibly, alive in its own way. Every time I recall it, I can feel the mist pressing against my skin, the creak of metal beneath me, the soft pacing echoing in the boards, and I know that somewhere in that fog, in that hollow, the bridge waits, patient and silent. A place where time bends and the ordinary rules do not apply. I have tried to rationalize it, told myself I imagined it, that it was exhaustion or stress or the trick of the fog, but every instinct in my body remembers differently. The experience is as real as the hills themselves, the weight of air, the cold press of mist, the echoing steps on wooden boards, the impossible stretch of the bridge, and I am left with a sensation that will never leave me. Even now, when fog rolls into the hollows and the night is heavy and quiet, I feel it, the subtle insistence of that place, as if it exists parallel to the roads I travel, a corridor to something I cannot name. Driving past, I glance toward where the bridge should be, heart quickening, and the memory presses in, the figures, the mist, the impossible length of the span, and the sense that I was momentarily somewhere beyond ordinary reality, a place patient and silent, watching, waiting. Story 9, Cries from the Broken Plank. I remember approaching that old bridge before I even saw it. The forest had grown dense around the narrow trail, the late afternoon sun barely breaking through the canopy. I'd been exploring the back roads of Appalachia for hours, drawn to the crumbling structures that dotted the hills, remnants of a time before paved roads and modern maps. The bridge came into view as a jagged line of broken planks spanning a shallow creek. The metal supports rusted and twisted, the wood splintered and blackened with age. It was one of those places that feels alive even in stillness, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and earth, as though the forest had absorbed every sound, every footstep, every story that had touched it. I stepped carefully onto the remaining planks, testing each one before putting my full weight down. The wood groaned under me, complaining in long, mournful moans that mingled with the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the creek beneath. I leaned over the edge, peering into the shallow water and mud, expecting only the usual twisted branches, rocks, perhaps a fallen log, but instead I heard it, a soft cry, high and trembling, rising from beneath the broken span. It was faint, at first, almost imperceptible, but it carried through the still forest with a weight that made my ears ring. I froze, convinced it was some animal trapped in the underbrush, but the sound had a clarity, a distinctly human quality that made my chest tighten. It rose again, louder this time, a small, desperate cry that seemed to echo off the distant hills and back into my ears, as if the forest itself were amplifying it. I knelt down on the planks, gripping the edge of the bridge, straining to see anything in the shallow water below, but there was nothing. No movement, no figure, only the placid creek and the blackened mud along the banks. Then the crying changed. It became a scream, urgent and piercing, a sound that seemed to carry centuries of anguish. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled backward on the planks, hands pressed to my ears trying to block it out. Yet even as the scream faded, it left a ringing in my head, a weight pressing into my thoughts. I forced myself to look again, gathering the courage to lean over the edge one more time, but the creek was silent. The mud and water lay undisturbed, holding no trace of a child, no sign of life at all. I stood there trembling, listening to the forest settle back into quiet, the breeze picking up and moving through the branches, whispering across the broken timbers. My mind raced. I tried to rationalize what I had heard, an echo carried by the hollowed valley, an animal making an uncanny sound, a trick of my own imagination after hours alone on the trail. Yet the intensity of the cries, the urgency in that voice, lingered in my chest. It was as though the bridge itself had absorbed some memory, some sorrow, and had chosen to release it only for me. I dared a few steps closer to the center, where the boards were less stable, where the metal framework bent and twisted in ways that made every step uncertain. My flashlight illuminated splintered wood and moss, the shallow water glinting faintly as it caught the last rays of sun. I leaned over again, half expecting the child to reappear, half hoping it would not. Silence greeted me. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though every sound I made, the groan of the wood, the snap of a branch in the underbrush, was recorded and folded back into the forest. The feeling was suffocating. The bridge did not feel empty. It felt burdened, weighted by something invisible. A sorrow that stretched back through every misstep, every fall, every loss that had touched it. My imagination ran wild, conjuring stories of children lost to the currents, travelers who had stumbled across missing planks and vanished without a trace. I couldn't escape the sense that the bridge itself held these memories in its warped wood, whispering them into the mind of anyone foolish enough to linger. I backed off slowly, the splintered edges biting at my boots, the boards groaning beneath each cautious step. The screaming had ceased entirely, leaving only a low, humming presence that seemed to press against my temples, as if the sorrow I had heard was seeping into me. I wanted to run, to leave the trail, but I felt rooted in place, compelled to linger, to witness, to understand. My flashlight shook in my hand as I scanned the edges of the creek, half expecting the figure of the child to emerge from the shallows, but there was nothing, only the murmur of water, the rustle of leaves, the soft groan of timber responding to my weight. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the trail and river, and I finally accepted that the bridge had nothing tangible to offer me. It had shown me only its grief, its hidden history, a secret carried through the planks and rusted beams. I stepped off the broken wood carefully, feeling the air lighten as I moved back onto solid ground. The cry, the scream, the unbearable sense of sorrow, all receded slowly, but not entirely. A faint ringing remained in my ears, a whispering of grief that refused to leave, and I knew that the bridge had imprinted itself upon me as surely as I had pressed my boots into its timbers. I did not return that way for months, and when I finally did, the bridge was unchanged, and yet entirely different. The sun's angle had shifted, the shadows were longer, the forest quieter in its own way, but the oppressive weight I had felt lingered. I walked along the edge, careful to stay on stable boards, and though I did not hear cries again, I sensed the presence of something patient, silent, enduring. It was as if the bridge had stored the sorrow of every misstep, every fall, every loss, and I had been allowed a glimpse into it. Brief and intolerable. Even now, whenever I drive near creeks or abandoned structures in the hills, I feel it. The weight of the unseen, the echo of voices carried on the wind, the sense that some places are repositories of memory and grief, patient and unyielding. That collapsed bridge, with its broken planks and shallow creek, holds more than wood and water. It holds the sorrow of those lost, those who vanished, those whose stories were never told. I can still hear the echoes in my mind, a child crying, a scream echoing, and then silence, as though the forest had swallowed everything whole. And though I have long since left the trail behind, the memory remains with me, pressing lightly, insistent, reminding me that the world holds more than what is visible, that some structures remember, some places grieve, and some cries reach only those willing, or unfortunate enough, to listen. I think of that bridge often, of the child whose voice seemed to reach through time, and I am left with a quiet sorrow, a lingering awareness that even in daylight, even miles away, that sorrow is present, patient, and enduring, folded into the world in ways we cannot ever fully understand. Story 1. Shadows beneath the iron span. I remember that night like a photograph smudged with time, everything sharp at first, then dissolving into a blur of fog and steel. I'd been driving home from a late shift at the mill, the kind of night where the only lights are your headlights cutting through black, and the only sounds are tires crunching on gravel and the occasional owl breaking the stillness. West Virginia backroads are lonely enough during the day, but at night they become something else entirely, roads that feel watched, paths where the forest leans in closer than it ought to, and the air tastes of damp earth and something else, something old and heavy. I didn't think much of it at first, just a normal drive home. But that bridge, God, that bridge changed everything. I'd been following the road that winds along a shallow river, the kind that murmurs quietly beneath overhanging trees, water dark and impossible to see through. My headlights caught glimpses of broken fence posts, signs faded into unreadable blurs, and then, as I rounded a bend, it came into view. The iron frame appeared suddenly, like it had been waiting there all along. It was old, rusted in places, the paint peeling, the boards beneath the metal grates warped from years of neglect. Fog rolled up from the water, and I could barely see the river below. I slowed instinctively, telling myself it was just caution. But my chest tightened. There was something off about that bridge. As I drove closer, I caught movement at the edge. A figure crouched low, hidden by the shadows, yet unmistakably there. I froze. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt, and for a moment I just sat, staring. It felt like the figure was studying me, measuring me, testing whether I belonged in that place. I wanted to tell myself it was a deer, maybe some foolish hiker or drunk wandering the roads, but the way it moved, or didn't move, was too deliberate. And then, almost as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, swallowed by the fog. My heart thundered so loudly I was sure the figure could hear it. I kept driving, but the road didn't feel the same. Every shadow seemed longer, every rustle in the trees louder than it had been moments before. When I finally got home, I couldn't shake it. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was fatigue, imagination, or the way the fog distorted everything. But the memory of that crouching figure refused to leave, like it had planted itself somewhere deep in my mind. Weeks later, curiosity, or perhaps some grim necessity to understand, led me to the local library. I'd heard whispers in town about the bridge, old stories passed along by folks who claimed to know the roads better than anyone else. I asked around, and eventually I found a newspaper clipping buried in the archives, yellowed and brittle. It told the story of a man who had disappeared from that very bridge decades ago. No trace, no explanation, just vanished one foggy night, leaving only questions and fear in the hearts of those who lived nearby. Reading it, I felt the hair on my arms rise. It wasn't the first disappearance, they said. Others, unreported or quickly forgotten, were hinted at in small local notes. But this one stuck, the details precise and horrifying in their simplicity. After that, every drive that took me near that bridge became unbearable. I would see it from a distance, the iron frame jutting through mist like some skeletal hand reaching for the sky. The memory of that crouching figure, silent, watchful, impossible to name, haunted me. Some nights, I swear I can see movement from my window when I approach, shadows shifting where there should be nothing. I've caught myself gripping the wheel tightly, eyes scanning every inch of that road, heart thudding, expecting to see someone or something watching me again. Once, I stopped on the road before the bridge, just to breathe, just to tell myself I wasn't losing my mind. I got out of the car and walked to the edge, fog curling around my boots, dampness settling into my clothes. The river whispered below, dark and constant. I leaned over the railing and squinted, searching for movement, but the mist swallowed everything. It was empty, yet somehow not. I felt the weight of the past pressing down, all the disappearances, all the stories, all the fear that had accumulated over decades, and it was like the bridge itself was alive with it, waiting, watching, patient. I didn't stay long that night. The air felt thicker than usual, and I could hear my own breathing in the stillness. As I drove away, I glanced back over my shoulder and thought I saw a shape crouched again, just beyond the fog, watching. My stomach dropped, a cold, sinking feeling that stayed with me for hours. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the fog playing on the edges of perception, but deep down, I knew better. That bridge doesn't forget. It keeps what it claims. In the days that followed, I tried to avoid that road entirely. I took longer routes home, even if it meant adding miles to my drive. But the memory clung to me. Sometimes, at night, I dream of the bridge. I see the iron beams looming through the mist, the figure crouched on the edge, watching. The river below is black, endless, and the fog swirls in ways that don't make sense. I wake up with a cold sweat, heart racing, unable to shake the sense that I'm being followed, even in my dreams. I told friends about it, half expecting them to dismiss my experience as tiredness or imagination, but some of them nodded knowingly, hinting at old, local stories. They spoke quietly about the bridge, careful not to give too much away, but enough to let me know I wasn't imagining it. People disappear there, not often, but enough that the story has weight. It's a place where the shadows gather and wait, and I realized slowly, with a chill that ran the length of my spine, that the figure I saw wasn't just a random shadow, it was part of that wait, part of that waiting, something I can't name, something I hope never to see again. Now, years later, I still drive that road sometimes. I try to avoid it, but circumstances have me pass it more than I care for. Every time I see the skeletal beams jutting into the fog, every time I feel that same tightening in my chest, the cold breath of something patient and unrelenting. And though I never see the figure crouching again, I know it's there, or that something like it is. I've learned to recognize the signs, the way the mist clings longer, the way the night feels heavier, the way my skin pricks with unease. That bridge takes its own time. It waits, and it remembers. I've never told anyone everything, not because I think they wouldn't believe me, but because I think some truths are better left unspoken. That bridge is part of a story older than anyone alive now, a story of patience, of shadow, of waiting. And though I drive past it even now, I can't shake the feeling that it watches, remembers, and waits for the next person who passes too slowly, too carelessly, down that fog-choked road. The thought keeps me alert at night, keeps me wary on roads that should be familiar, because I know now, without a doubt, that some places are patient, some shadows never leave. And some roads are best left untravelled after dark. The bridge has changed me in ways I cannot name. It has taught me to see the subtle signs, the shift of fog, the glint of iron in the night, the faintest movement in the corner of an eye. And it has taught me that the past is never past in these hills, that it lingers in wood, in water, in rusted steel. Sometimes when the night is still and the fog is thick, I swear I hear the river whisper my name. Or maybe it's just the echo of a long forgotten disappearance calling me home. I don't stop anymore. Not really. I drive past as quickly as I can, eyes fixed straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel, heart hammering with the memory of that crouching figure, and the quiet, suffocating knowledge that the shadows are patient, they wait, and they remember.